Thank you all. So I have the honor to introduce our guest speaker today. But before I introduce him, I would like to thank our leadership and brokers who participated in the Disruption Cycle Survey. Disruption is a fact of life in business, and few industries have been disrupted more than the real estate over the past few years. Change comes and goes and continues at an unprecedented pace. And that's why Canopy engaged Steve McKee to conduct a disruption cycle survey and be our keynote speaker here today. Steve McKee is the co-founder of McKee Wallwork and Company, a nationally recognized marketing advisory firm. He is the author of When Growth Stalls, How It Happens, Why You're Stuck, and What to Do About It, an award-winning business book now published in 4 languages. And Power Branding, Leveraging the Success of the World's Best Brands, which New York Times bestselling author Jay Baer called the definitive book of modern branding that should be mandatory reading in all business schools in America. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Steve McKee, who will share the survey results so that we can gain insights to how we're doing as an association, an MLS, and an industry. Please welcome Steve McKee.
I am going to share the results of the survey with you. I'm excited to do that. Before I do, I need to set it up. I need to explain to you a little bit about what the disruption cycle is. And I'm going to start with really good news. The core of every business is dying. Is that good news for this morning? You feel good about that? When I first heard this statement, this was Sir George Buckley. He was knighted. He was the CEO, former CEO of 3M. And when I think I read this, and my initial reaction was, that's not true. That can't be true. But then I thought about it for a minute and I thought, well, of course it's true. So I want to do a little test for all of you. Who in this room, and just shout it out, can you name a 100-year-old company? Okay. I heard a lot of them. I didn't hear any of them, but I heard a lot of them. I trust you. Canopy Realtor Association, there you go. Somebody name a 200-year-old company. Come on. Wells Fargo. Husqvarna, is it? Okay. Somebody name for me a 300-year-old company. Ford? I don't think so. If all else fails, be a realtor. I'm kidding. It's hard to do, isn't it? It's hard to name a 300-year-old company. And here's the thing. Companies don't last that long. We think just because companies outlast our lifetimes, that companies are like eternal. But as vast majority of companies fail before a generation. The vast number of companies fail before they're 20 years old. And only a handful can grow to be 3, 4, or 5. Caswell Massey, is that how you say that? 271 years old. George Washington gave some perfume to the Marquis. That's pretty cool, but that's not very old. How about the oldest company in Europe? Old Bushmills Distillery. 415 years. There are some old distilleries in America, in Kentucky, and I think Jack Daniels and some of those are pretty ancient. What about the oldest company in the world? Anybody know what it is? I would be surprised if you did. Can you read that? It's called Congo Gumi. It's in Japan. It's almost 1,500 years old, sort of. It went bankrupt in the early 2000s and was rescued out of bankruptcy, so it's technically still alive, but this is a list of the oldest companies still operating today. Most of them are in Asia or Europe. And this is the exception that proves the rule. Companies, like people, are material things. And material things are born, they grow, they thrive, they decline, and they die. And that's what we want to talk about today. If we don't prepare for the future of our company, if we don't disrupt ourselves, if a company's own research does not make it obsolete, somebody else's will. And that's the message I'd like to bring with you today. It really is good news. It might sound like it's bad news, but it's good news because I'm going to skip to the punchline. You all have the power to ensure that your organizations can live on. So, quick test. This is 20 years ago. It's an iconic brand, 100-year heritage, 7,000 stores, $5 billion in revenue. What company is it? Sears. Wrong. Good guess. Not correct. Macy's. No. Neiman Marcus. Woolworths, no. Levi, no. Haven't heard it yet. You guys are going to kick yourselves. 20 years ago, not Kmart. You ready? Oh yeah, those guys. Did you know that at the peak of Radio Shack's business, there was a store within 5 miles of every American? When I was a kid, remember the 65-in-1 electronic set? Anybody remember that? Where did you go to Radio Shack? You went to Radio Shack because you needed that esoteric, like that weird battery or speaker wire for you millennials in the world. We used to have to wire our speakers. That's why you went to Radio Shack. What happened to Radio Shack? You know what happened to Radio Shack? This happened to Radio Shack, didn't it? If you need that weird battery or that speaker wire, I don't know why you would need speaker wire. And you can wait till tomorrow, or in some cities later this afternoon, you simply call Amazon. That's what happened to Radio Shack. Now, I have to give you a confession, true story. 7 or 8 years ago, I cracked my femur. It was very unpleasant. And I went to the doctor after a bunch of bad diagnoses, and I sat in the doctor's office, and the physician told me, I got bad news. You're going to be on crutches for 6 or 7 weeks. No weight bearing at all. And this is true story. My very first thought was, how am I going to carry my Starbucks? So I got in the car before I left the parking lot, and there's got to be and sure enough, I looked on my phone. The next day, I had what's called crutches, which is a cup holder that attaches to crutches. And I only missed one day. And every time I hobbled into Starbucks, people giggled at me, and then they saw me carry it out, and they went, that's pretty cool. So this is what happened to Radio Shack. A lot of things happened to Radio Shack, but Amazon was really the final blow to Radio Shack, because anything you could get there, you could get online. Amazon was also the final blow to Toys R Us. I don't know if you know anything about Toys R Us. When my kids were little, we used to go there before Christmas and shop, and it was just a whole lot of fun. There's a lot of things that happened to Toys R Us. They were owned by 3 private equity firms who couldn't agree on anything, and that was problematic. But then a few years later, Amazon started selling toys. By the way, you know, Amazon has a toy catalog now. Is that kind of crazy? And Toys R Us is no more. Same thing happened to Whole Foods. Now, they threw in the towel on the front end. Whole Foods was doing just fine, but they saw where this whole thing was going, and they sold themselves to Amazon. Now, I'm not here to pick on Amazon. Did I lose me? I'll use my dad voice. This isn't a pick on Amazon, because Amazon isn't the only company that does this. Organizations are born, they live, and they die. Chris Zook and James Allen wrote a great book. It's called The Founder's Mentality. If I could just pause and do a commercial here. Buy it and read it. The Founder's Mentality. It's a 3-hour read. You're going to love it. But they said they looked at 8,000 companies, and this is what they say. The odds are during the next 15 years, 2 out of every 3 of these multi-billion-dollar enterprises are going to stall or go bankrupt or have other kind of issues. My research is the same. We found the same things. I don't know if you know Nassim Taleb. He's a brilliant prognosticator. It's kind of an interesting turn of phrase. The country got strong because of high rates of bankruptcy. It does. It's called creative destruction. That's what we live in. That companies are born and they thrive and they bring new things to the world, and then they get a lot of competitors, and then they begin to die, or new companies start up and new technologies come along and they destroy them. Creative destruction is wonderful for us as consumers. It's not so good for us as business owners, whether it's a big business or a small business. This is a medallion, a New York City tax medallion. 10 years ago, this thing was worth more than $1 million. Gives you the permission to operate taxi cabs in New York. Do you know what it's worth today? Like $80,000. Which is really incredible, because car rides for hire have increased exponentially. There are more of us hire cars to take us somewhere than ever used to before, and yet the taxi industry is in decline. We all know why. Because they were outmoved by Uber and Lyft and those kind of companies. Everybody is familiar with the story of Kodak? Kodak is basically no more. Kodak invented the digital camera. You're aware of that, right? They invented the digital camera. They put it on the shelf because they're not in the camera business. They were in the film business. And guess what? Now, what's so interesting is I have more photos on this little device than I ever had in a photo album anywhere. More photos are being taken today at a higher quality than ever before. And yet, where's Kodak? You see, we see this happen over and over and over again. Sears actually disrupted themselves twice. First, with the catalog. That's how Sears started. when you were on the prairie, you got the Sears catalog and you can order it. When I was a kid, we used to circle the toys in there before Christmas and say, these are the ones I want, hearing some recognition of that. But then Sears disrupted itself because they went into the retail business and they had a store everywhere. Now Sears, as you know, is on the ropes. It won't be around forever. It's basically a real estate company, meaning they own the real estate. They're not very good at retail anymore. Even though retail expenditures, there's more money being spent on clothes and appliances and all the things that Sears sells than ever before. It's really remarkable how companies can grow and live and die. This is my favorite chart. It's a little hard to read, but you can just look at the peaks. This is recorded music revenue for the industry. It peaked there around the year 2000 when people were still buying cassettes and compact discs at about $21.5 billion. And then look what happened. It dropped off dramatically. The advent of Napster was the first one where people stole the music. And then iTunes, and then Spotify and Pandora and those sorts of things. Here's what's really interesting about this chart. See the yellow? What happened to all that revenue? Now, in the case of taxi cabs, the revenue went to Uber. And in the case of Kodak, the revenue went to Apple. And in the case of Sears, the revenue went to Amazon and other places. You know what happened to this revenue? Nothing. It evaporated. It's gone. If you were a musician and you were making your money off of recorded music, sorry, music publishing company, sorry. It just disappeared because of the advent of technology. And to add injury to insult, artists began going back on tour because that was the only way they could make money. And then we had this little thing called a global pandemic. And so there's never been a better time to be a consumer of music. Again, on this little device in my pocket, I've got any music I could ever want to listen to. It's a terrible time to be a producer of music from a business standpoint. And that's the world in which we live. More songs are being played today than ever, personalized to everybody, and yet record sales are in the tank, even though the kids are now buying records again. Why, I don't know. So Ted Levitt was a famous professor at the Harvard Business School. He published the Harvard Business Review. He wrote a book, this is 40 years old now, called The Marketing Imagination, which I also recommend to you. He says, in truth, there's no such thing as a growth industry. There are only companies organized and operated to create and capitalize on growth. Industries, this is important, that assume themselves to be riding some automatic growth escalator invariably descend into stagnation. The history of every dead and dying growth industry shows a self-deceiving cycle of bountiful expansion and undetected decay. And can I just say something? I love your industry. My mother was a realtor too. She used to hand her business cards to my friends in 8th grade, which was, kind of what she did. But God bless her, she waived all her commissions when she was handling my homes. May she rest in peace. But here's the thing about the real estate industry, and this is especially dangerous for you all. Because when the market is good, the market is good. When the market is bad, you get concerned. But when market conditions are good, it doesn't mean that the industry is in good shape. Do you understand the distinction there? It covers up a lot of issues. And so you have to beware when things are good that you might just be in a little bit of denial. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. So in March 1998, Fortune magazine ran a story that said how Yahoo won the search wars. Later on that year, Google was founded. And Yahoo, in June of 2007, the iPhone was, do you believe it was just 2007? The iPhone came out. Later that year, Forbes ran a story that said, can anyone catch the cell phone king, Nokia? Nokia had 42% market share when the iPhone was launched. 42%. It's now gone. Microsoft owns a piece of it. It's gone as a company. Believe it or not, Nokia invented the tablet computer as well. Apple didn't, but they couldn't get it to market for a host of reasons. That's another story. The S&P 500 in the 1920s, if your company was on that list, it was on that list for about 65 years. Today, if it's on the list, it might last 10. 51 companies have been on the Fortune 500 since 1955. I'm not very good at math, but that's about 10%. 90% turnover, which is really incredible. And then this is interesting. Any Tom Brady fans in the room? I hope not in this part of the world. Okay, we got a couple. Well, Tom Brady, first losing record ever this year. Ever. High school, college, pros, he's never had a losing record until this year. But he got into the playoffs, and you know what Tom Brady does? I don't think he's going to win the Super Bowl, so I'm going to stand by this. The last time Tom Brady played the Super Bowl in 2020, these are the advertisers that were in the game. This came out of this wonderful article. Some of them you recognize, some of them you may not exactly know what they are. But if you look at the first time Tom Brady played in the Super Bowl, these are the advertisers that are all out of business. Tom Brady, he's going to outlive us all, but he outlived all these, his Super Bowl career outlived all these companies. Crazy, isn't it? We don't pay attention to this stuff on a daily basis because why would we? But when you stop back and look at it, it's really pretty incredible. Just one of my favorite 28-year period, a couple of economists went back and they looked at the economy and they said, well, over that 28-year period, the United States economy averaged 2% job growth. Okay, so some years were better and some years were worse, but basically 2% job growth. At the same time, in the same time period, every year, more than 15% of all jobs were destroyed. Now, how do those two things add up? Like this, 17% new jobs, 15% jobs destroyed, net job growth too. It's not exactly how the math works, but it's kind of like that. So the way I like to think of it is it's like when you're looking at the surface of the ocean, this beautiful, calm ocean, that's the 2% growth, and it's nice and smooth and calming. What's going on underneath the surface? Yeah, the animals are eating each other. And it's fine if you're an eater. It's not fine if you're being eaten. And so we want to talk about today how not to be eaten. We all probably grew up, I think they call us white collar professionals. Those poor people in Cleveland and Pittsburgh in the Rust Belt, where their jobs are being replaced by robots. That's sort of been the story of the time in which I've been a professional. Those poor people, they need to retrain, right? Because of the mechanization of muscle. But watch out, because you know what's happening today is the mechanization of mind. Your mind and my mind. The extent to which, I'm going to make a provocative statement that I really want to hit home because I don't know if it will. The extent to which you process information, get out of that business. A lot of your job is processing information and managing transactions, get out. It was mentioned earlier that we're not order takers, we're consultants. Yes, that's the business you need to be in. We need to be, if we're going to maintain ourselves, we need to be in uniquely human jobs. Jobs that machines can't do. Machines can process information better than we can. Machines can process transactions better than we can. Pretty soon there will be no title companies. That's a pretty provocative statement. Mark my words, it's going to happen. So we need to be thinking about what is it about the services, the benefits, the value proposition that we offer that is uniquely human. And that's what we need to double down on and think about, because everything that can be automated will be automated. It's coming. It's just a matter of time. We need to pay attention to that. Wall Street Journal recently ran this article about the army of robots coming to save companies that have a hard time finding workers. So I don't know if you recognize this robot. This is Elon Musk's robot. And of course, he created it to look terrifying. But if you gathered all the industrial robots in the world into a city, just robots, not people, it would be the third largest city in America. That's kind of terrifying, isn't it? Robots are great, but robots are coming for us. This is a robot they call the Breezy One. This is terrific. Talk about jobs people don't want to do. How do you, in an age of COVID, how do you disinfect an entire airport overnight? You can hire a bunch of people and put them in gas masks and it's a miserable job. Or you can send the Breezy One rolling through the airport and disinfects the entire airport in an hour and a half. That's a pretty cool application because it's replacing jobs that are difficult. How about this one? This is another recent article. These guys are installing a toilet and they're not plumbers because plumbing companies can't find licensed plumbers. They can't find enough of them. So you know what they're doing? They're hiring untrained people and sending them to your home with a video camera. And the plumber sits back at the place and says, turn this bolt and move that thing. It's brilliant. It's a really interesting solution. But think what it's going to do to the plumbing industry as that technology evolves and gets more complicated. So here's the proposition. The first proposition I want to give you today, and this is very, very important. Hew tightly to your mission, hold loosely to your model. What does that mean? You have a mission. Your company has a mission. You personally have a mission. Some of you may have written down a mission statement. Some of you may not, but there is a reason you get out of bed in the morning. There's a reason you do what you do and you love what you do. Hold tightly to that. But your business model, how you do what you do, hold loosely to it. And we do just the opposite in business today too much. Companies tend to hold on to their mission because, well, this is the way we've always done it, or this is how it works. Or in a closely held family business, well, this is the way my mom and dad and my grandma and my granddad did it. Things change. Radio Shack held tightly to its model. Kodak held tightly to its model. Taxi cabs hold tightly to their model. They didn't think they had to change, and they got usurped. This is an interesting story. Apple you might not be surprised, is the world's most admired company on the Fortune list. The world's most admired company. This is what's fascinating to me. If you go all the way back to 2008, Apple was the world's most admired company. So since 2008 to today, Apple has been the world's most admired company. That doesn't really surprise us because Apple does a really great job. But here's what might surprise you. It's a little bit of a complicated chart, but I'll give you the punchline. 91% of what Apple sells today, it didn't sell in 2007. 9/10 of the company product line has turned over since it was first named the world's most admired company. That's why it's the world's most admired company today. They know where their bread is buttered, and they know they're not a product company. I don't know if you're aware of this. Apple doesn't even consider itself a technology company. Apple considers itself a consumer company, which is really fascinating. Apple changed its name and didn't tell anybody. In the early 2000s, Apple Computer Incorporated changed its name to Apple Incorporated. They didn't have to tell anybody, but they didn't tell anybody because they knew that they're not a computer company. They're in a different line of business. So you have a mission, your mission has a business. Let that sink in. Your business does not have a mission, your mission has a business. Be willing to change the business. Stick to your mission, be willing to change the business. So this gets me to Richard Rumelt, who's a wonderful professor at UCLA, who says the most important element of strategy is a coherent viewpoint about the forces at work, not a plan. Doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but if you think about it, we all do plans. We do marketing plans and business plans and financial plans. That's what we do. What Professor Rumelt is saying is, if your viewpoint about the forces at work is incoherent, your plan's going to not be worth the paper it's printed on. Even if you're off by a couple of degrees, you could be off significantly when you execute it. So the most important element of strategy is understanding what's going on out there. And that brings us to the disruption cycle. This is a piece of research that my company's been working on for 5 years now. We've been doing a lot of research for the past 25 years. We embarked on the disruption cycle about 5 years now. For those of you in the room who took the survey, it's 53 questions. It's a pretty easy thing to do. We've done it in a variety of industries. We have thousands of respondents. So we're going to look at your results today compared to yourself. We can look at it compared to the rest of the world. It's a really fascinating thing. The disruption cycle is a really fairly simple proposition. We took the business cycle, which we didn't invent, and we renamed it in ways that rhyme, because that's what we do. So every industry starts with disruption. Somebody comes up with a new idea. Go to the marketplace. Some fail and some succeed. Those that begin to succeed enter a phase of acceleration where they're growing very rapidly. And that phase can last for months, it can last for years. Usually not decades, probably years. Eventually, the industry begins to mature, things get figured out, prices get figured out, and the industry enters a period of maturation. This is when you're making money. This is when you're killing it, when you're crushing it, when your face is on the front of the trade magazines, where you're making your big bonuses and you're getting you new cars. Maturation phase can last for years or even decades. Sooner or later, one too many companies enters the business and the industry becomes saturated. And saturation is marked by price competition, among other things, which I'll show you in a moment. And if left unaddressed, the industry moves into commoditization, where you're filling out RFPs. Has anybody worked in an industry where you're competing based on RFPs? And it's just awful. And the company or the industry dies. The vast majority of companies never make it through a full cycle. The vast majority never make it through a full cycle. The ones we read about in the press, the big ones in the Fortune 500, they figured this out to one extent or another. But the vast majority of companies never make it through a single cycle. So just to give you a sense of how this works, commoditization, fast food. You don't want to be in the fast food business. It's commoditized today, right? 99-cent chicken nuggets, and they're not chicken, they're something. And you're hiring entry-level employees or robots. And your business is going to succeed based on if you're 10 seconds faster in the drive-through or which side of the street you're on. It's a really, really awful business to be in. You don't want to be in the fast food business because it's commoditized. What about saturation? Well, take your coffee shop, your average coffee shop, or your microbrewery, which 5 years ago you could kind of open one up, and as long as it was cool, you'd do just fine. A little bit hard to throw a rock today without hitting a coffee shop or a microbrewery. So, especially with COVID happening, you're going to start to see the herd get thinned there. Coffee shops and microbreweries are in saturation mode. You want to talk about maturation? Chipotle and concepts like it, sort of the fast casual thing. It started with Chipotle with the Mexican burrito stuff, and then they've experimented with Asian concept and Italian concept and so forth. And they're kind of springing up all over the place. Doing great. Hard to get out of Chipotle for less than $15 for what it amounts to a fast food meal. So they're doing just fine for now. And then acceleration, you could name any number of things. I put street tacos in there because it seems like everywhere I go, there's street tacos on the menu or a food truck or something. So this is how it works. We actually did a disruption cycle analysis of the pizza industry. I used to work on the Pizza Hut business. I don't know if you're aware of this, but the pizza industry in America is only 70 years old. In 1950, nobody in America knew what pizza was. See, again, we don't realize these things because it's always been around for us. And when Pizza Hut launched, they had like 80% margins because nobody knew what a pizza should cost. So they charged them whatever they wanted. I mean, it's probably $1.95 in 1950, but the pizza industry has gone through all four phases and is deeply grounded in commoditization today. I spoke to a group of Pizza Hut franchisees who told me that their $14 pizza, they're now selling for 12 and now 10, and soon it'll be 9. And they don't know how to get out of it. They don't know how to get out of it. I gave them some tips. I don't know if they're going to take that advice, but this is what we're looking at. So 5 years ago, we began this research and we began with an inspiration, and the inspiration was Apple. Jobs and Wozniak in the garage. If you think about it, this is late 1970s, I believe, Apple started, and they were in acceleration mode. They launched the Apple II and the Lisa, and then along came the Macintosh. And believe it or not, by the late 1980s, the personal computer industry was in saturation mode. What am I talking about? There was a time when, I think it was Bill Gates, might have been the head of digital, who said, we're going to all have a computer on our desk. And people thought he was crazy. Why would you need a computer on your desk? That happened by the late 1980s. You either had a PC or a Macintosh, pretty much everywhere across America. And the industry was in saturation, and the Macintosh didn't do as well because of that. And what happened? Steve Jobs gets fired. And what did Apple do? They brought in the commodity guy, John Sculley from Pepsi, to run the company. So within 13 years or so, Apple went through a cycle. Apple was near bankruptcy. I don't know if you know the story. They bought Steve Jobs' company Next, and they brought Steve Jobs back in. Interestingly, he says, had he not been fired and had other experience, he wouldn't have known how to fix Apple. So he came in and trimmed the product line way back. He cut R&D. He knew what he was after, and he launched the iMac. Remember the iMac? The funniest looking computer you'd ever seen. And then he launched the iPod. Wow. And then he launched the iPhone, and Apple became the world's most valuable company. Alas, people like companies are material things. Steve Jobs dies. Apple starts having big company problems, planned obsolescence, quality issues, and so forth. And what's Apple going to do? Much to his credit, Steve Jobs' successor, Tim Cook, came on and says, we're going to become a services company. This is Apple's. They're now less than 50 years old. They've been through the cycle twice. They're betting the farm on becoming a services company. And much to his credit, can't really read this chart. The pink line in the middle is Apple services revenue. I'm sorry, the orange. Apple services revenue. This one might help you a little bit. Fully 16% of Apple's business is now services. And they're crushing it with their margins. They're still doing well. Apple has bet the farm on the disruption cycle twice in its less than 50-year history. And that's one reason why they're one of the world's most admired companies. So 2018, we did our first economy-wide survey. This is what the US economy looked like. About 70% of the economy was on the upswing, if you want to call it that, in disruption, acceleration, and maturation. About 30% of the country was on the downslope. We didn't have anything to compare it to. This is our benchmark, but felt right. The economy was pretty healthy. This is pre-COVID. 70% growth, 30% decline. Okay, it is what it is. We began doing this in various industries. We looked at the insurance industry, you know, your independent insurance broker types, and they're in a little bit of hurt. About half of them are on the upswing and about half of them are on the downslope. So the industry average is somewhere in early saturation. Not a lot of disruption going on in there. And that makes sense. It's kind of an old model. If you have an insurance agent, it's kind of an old business model. They haven't really innovated a lot in recent years. We do a lot of work in the funeral industry, and go ahead and make all the jokes, right? They're near death. They're in a big world of hurt. You got about 40% on the upslope and 60%, 65% on the downslope. Why? You know why? Because the disruption cycle keeps moving, and it moves at different paces in different industries. In the tech industry, you know you're lucky if you get a decade out of some innovation. I wouldn't want to be in the tech industry for that reason, because it's very stressful. You invent something new and then it's going to be obsolete soon. But at least you know. And so Apple can be prepared to do this. In the funeral industry, the cycle, this cycle has lasted about 130 years. It's like the hands on a clock. They move slowly, so you don't think they're moving, but they're moving. So closely held industry, usually family-owned companies. My company's not doing well. My funeral home's not doing well. My father is looking over my shoulder. He's retired. And his father's looking over his shoulder, and it is father in this case with these multi-generations back. And I'm going to let the family down. And this is the way we've always done it. And this is the way it needs to be done. You get the pressure. And so as a result, 63%, I was thinking back to some research we did, 63% of Americans actively look to avoid funeral homes when somebody dies. Yeah, that's not good. So the industry needs to be alerted to this, and they are. That's why we do a lot of work in this industry, because they, like any other industry, can innovate. And I'd love to tell you sometime about those innovations. So as I was saying, the disruption cycle keeps moving for everybody, but it's speeding up. It's speeding up because technology is speeding up and cultural changes are speeding up. So change keeps coming, but change keeps coming at an increased, more rapid pace. And if that doesn't terrify you, I don't know what does. It excites me. If you like change, if you want to lead change, it's an exciting thing, but it keeps coming. So let me tell you a little bit about the phase breakdowns in the cycle, and then we'll get into your results. Here's how it works. If you're in the acceleration phase, this is you can call it the startup phase. This is the fun times. You may not be making any money, but you're doing well. And this is both literal startups, but also like skunkworks or new operations within existing companies. So of the 53 questions, these are the ones that they answered affirmatively, like we're growing aggressively, we're achieving our goals, we're fully aligned, we're good at employee retention because it's fun to work here. Employers are in sync with leadership here. We embrace change. Again, it's the salad days. It's the good old days. It's terrific times to be in. If you ask them what your biggest business challenge is in the acceleration phase, they things like, well, competition and technology and innovation and training and retention, because we really can't pay our people very well. But this is what they're facing. Companies move into the maturation phase. Well, we're expanding into new markets. We're willing to take creative risks. Our growth is outpacing our ability to maintain quality. That's one marker of the maturation phase. We are outgrowing our internal systems. That's another marker of the maturation phase. But hey, we're making our bonuses. We're making money. We're getting famous. They're writing about us. It's terrific. If you ask them what their challenges are in the maturation phase, it's change and growth and staffing. And yes, competition gets bigger. And the one that cracks me up is regulations. We're fond of saying the regulators are often late to the party, but they never miss it. So if you're succeeding, somebody's going to notice and say, let's go regulate that thing. That's what happens in the maturation phase. Sooner or later, inevitably, one too many competitors enters the market, and our growth begins to slow, and our company starts to feel lost, and we begin to overthink things, and speed is more important than quality. And our biggest challenge is now pricing. Of course it is, because you're being compared apples to apples, and leadership. And maybe nepotism, again, closely held companies, because now it's been 30 years and now Junior, who doesn't deserve to be the next CEO, might be in line to be the next CEO, and all those wonderful issues. I have 4 kids. I told them not only are they not going to get my company, they shouldn't go into my business. Go do something on your own. Make your own way. Biggest business challenge there, pricing. We get to commoditization, and now we're just trying to survive. Work is starting to harm my personal relationships. Revenue is more important than profit because we're just trying to keep the lights on. We need a new business model. I don't know what we stand for. We don't invest enough money in training or R&D or marketing or anything. We're experiencing some internal discord. We have a lot of false start. It's a rotten place to be. And the biggest business challenge there, retention. And remember, in acceleration, it was retention as well, but it's because we can't pay people. They love working here. Now, the rats are jumping ship, and the most talented rats who have the most options are the first to go. And so the ones that are left behind, what are they going to do? Leadership, competence, culture, really, really difficult times to be in. I should point out, this is not part of my presentation. We know about this stuff. I know about this stuff because we lived it. That's how I got into this business. My company nearly went bankrupt in 2003. Right after we were named to the Inc. 500 list of the fastest growing private companies in America. Very, very difficult time. We initially did the research to understand these dynamics. And yes, there's something going on inside of companies when stuff gets bad on the outside. Back to Zook and Allen, they said that more than 4 in 5 problems on the outside of the business trace to problems on the inside. I can personally testify that that's true. So what we did, we made the Inc. 500 list. We stalled 2 years of drift, 94% turnover. I'm a professional service firm. Just like think about your business. 94% turnover in 2 years. How are you going to survive that? And I was staring at myself in the mirror, bleary-eyed, blaming myself. I gave myself too much credit on the way up, gave myself way too much blame on the way down because I thought it was because I was doing something wrong. I wasn't. We were just a victim of these marketplace dynamics and we didn't know it. So we went and surveyed the Inc. 500. This was the first research that we did. We did a study among Inc. 500 companies and found that about 20% of those who had ever made the Inc. 500 list were in the same boat as we were. And there were 4 reasons why. And you see them on the chart. Lack of consensus, fighting around the management table, lack of alignment among the management team. Actually, all the way up and down the organization, but especially among the management team. The number one issue, the most common issue, and the biggest problem because we tend to not want to see it. So I've been in companies where they're screaming the F-bomb at each other, which is kind of awkward, but at least it's not passive aggression. Yeah, more often than not, it's a rolling of the eyes or a hallway conversation or a half commitment to something. We're fond of saying, if you're not aligned, it doesn't matter what your strategy is because it won't get executed. This is the number one problem we see. Second, a loss of focus in the marketplace happens 2 ways. Either you're doing really well and you get cocky and you start doing things you shouldn't and you lose your focus, or you get hit with some sort of a tectonic event, something from the outside, a new technology or a recession, and you start chasing business you shouldn't, or compromising your business principles and you lose your focus. Loss of nerve. Companies get scared. We all get scared. So we pull in our horns. We stop spending on marketing. We stop spending on training. We stop spending on R&D. Or importantly, we stop being willing to have what we call sharp elbows in the marketplace, which is standing out. We start to want to stand under the same trees where our competitors are because it feels safer somehow under there, which only hurts the loss of focus. And the last one is inconsistency. Things aren't going so well, so we look for silver bullet solutions. We try this and we try that and we try the other. Those 4 things form a vicious cycle. Doesn't really matter where you start the cycle, and they reinforce one another. And this is the drain around which most companies go out of business. If you read the business press with these 4 factors in mind, and you read about struggling companies, you will be able to identify. I once read a 800-word article about the demise of Yahoo, 800 words, and I found all 4 factors in it. By contrast, you want to be fully aligned and focused and convicted and excited about your marketplace and go to market with consistency, both across the organization and over time. The trouble is, it's really hard to get and stay in the green, and it's really easy to slip down into the red. It's the second law of thermodynamics. They call it entropy, the tendency of everything in the universe towards disarray. This is the story of our lives. So that is what's going on inside companies in the bad part of the disruption cycle. And I mentioned we did this research about 20 years ago. On our website, we put this little 60-second self-diagnosis where you can answer 20 questions, get a little thermometer of how you might be doing in each of the 4 areas. When we launched the disruption cycle research, we incorporated this, we included it, and this is really remarkable. Companies in acceleration phase tend to show green, all green. Not perfect, because no company is perfect, but across those 4 factors, I know you can't read it, but you can see the little green lines. Companies in acceleration mode tend to be green. Companies in maturation mode tend to be green for different reasons, but they tend to be green. You're making money, you're doing fine. Watch what happens when one too many companies enters the market. It reverts to the mean, and the first thing to tip is usually alignment. Why? Because now that remark that somebody said across the table that you used to overlook because you were doing just fine bothers you. Now that idea that somebody has that you didn't really agree with, you're going to speak up on. Before you were making your mortgage and making your bonus and getting a new car. Now you're not getting a bonus and your mortgage might be threatened. Guess what? You're going to start to raise issues. Things are going to start to bother you. And this is where it begins, because if you don't address these internal dynamics in the saturation phase, your company will get a fever and it will die. Health is defined as the stasis between the bacteria that are always trying to kill us and our immune systems, which are defeating the bacteria. That's health. I personally believe that all 4 factors are in all companies at all times because we're human and we disagree on things. But when your company is healthy, the corporate immune system is tamping down these issues and it's fine. When you get hit with a tectonic event, a down market, a recession, a new competitor, a new technology, you get a fever. And if you don't address the fever, it can take over the body and it can kill the company. We see this happen over and over and over and over again. So at a 30,000-foot level, these are all the charts you just saw. This is pretty incredible. If you move from all green to red as you go from acceleration to commoditization, The things across the bottom are the biggest challenges that I said people face. 30,000 foot level. When you're most relevant to the market, when you're on the left side of the chart, your biggest challenges are related to the market. Least relevant to the market, the ones on the right, your biggest challenges are yourself. Staring at your own navel, wondering what you're going to do. And just like anyone will tell you, if you suffer from some anxiety or depression, one way to get over it is to go serve someone less fortunate than you. If you turn your attention back to the marketplace and you say, let's get our mind off of us. Let's get our mind on our customer. What are their needs? How can we meet their needs differently? How can we not worry so much about the way we do things, but change the way we do things to meet people's needs better? It will likely lead you to the solution if you're open-minded enough. So, with all that as preface, doing all right on time. Where are we? You might be asking, where are we? How did we do on the disruption cycle survey? You did great. What does that mean? You did great. Many of you in the room took the report. When you get back to your office today, you should have your personal report waiting for you in your email inbox. Hopefully that'll be the case. My team should be working on it right now. Now, first I'd like to go over, we did 2 surveys, one among brokerages and then one among association and MLS members. So I just want to hit the highlights, just the high points of the results. Now, this is a little bit difficult because normally we do the disruption cycle a company at a time, and you look at the issues within the company because what do we have to fix and what do we not? This is a merge of all of your answers, but it's kind of interesting if you want to look at it as sort of an industry snapshot today. This is where you averaged out late stage maturation, which is kind of interesting. Why is it late stage maturation? Well, for a variety of reasons. This is true among all the different brokerage sizes. I'll show you a few breakouts. But pretty much everybody averaged late stage maturation. 50 to 99 agent firms were a little earlier than that, but it's not really a big difference. What word sums up your biggest business challenge? We heard it earlier today. Inventory, rates. All of a sudden there are interest rates. What are those? Biggest business challenge right now. Yeah, but again, I would just caution you, don't look at simply what the Fed's doing or what inventory is doing when you look at your industry. This is an opportunity to look below the surface. Biggest business challenge, pretty much consistent among all 4 different kinds of sizes. Inventory, 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 inventory. Time is on there. Revenue and commission is on there. That's something you want to pay attention to. We'll look at that in a moment. I'm going to take you through a handful of the answers to the questions. I just want to explain to you how to read these. The way we set these charts up is red is bad and green is good, just like a stoplight, and yellow is caution. So depending upon whether the question was asked in the affirmative or in the negative, the color scheme could change. Just look for the red and look for the green as I go through these. It'll be kind of interesting. So the first thing I want to touch on, we're achieving our marketing objectives. Okay, about half of you say we're achieving our marketing objectives. About another quarter say, not really sure, and about a quarter say, no, we're not. This is pretty normal. You're not going to find any industry where everybody's achieving their marketing objectives, so I wouldn't really worry about that. Similarly, we're funding our marketing plan sufficiently. Kind of the same breakdown. I would note that if you're not achieving your marketing objectives, it might be because you're not funding your plan sufficiently. You might want to look at that. That'd be kind of an easy answer. Not true in every case, but you never know. Third one, we're funding our marketing plan sufficiently. This is by a breakdown by size of company. And this I would simply want to point out that generally speaking, the smaller the company, the more difficult it is to fund your plan sufficiently. Again, that's true across the economy at large. I'm more bullish on our future than I was a year ago. You know, I'd like to see more green here. Now, is this because of marketplace conditions that you answered this? Or is this because of the nature of your industry? I can't say. Only you can say how you answered it. If it's because of marketplace conditions, it kind of is what it is. If it's because of the nature of your industry, you want to pay very close attention to it. Nevertheless, I sure would like to see some more green on this chart. Your place on the cycle, we talked about maturation phase. I'm not going to read this to you. I just want to point out in your report, if you're in the maturation phase, one of the things that we say is this is a time for building profitability, building brand equity, building culture, because now's when you're making money. Now's when you're doing it. And you're going to need to draw down that equity as you get further along into the future. Here's the thing that kind of freaked me out, though. What do you fear most about the future of your company? No fear. I don't like that answer. I'll tell you why I don't like that. It's great in certain contexts, right? We're going to survive. We're smart people. We're capable. Sort of that spirit of we're going to win. That's terrific. But you know what? If that's your only answer, guess what? You're going to get surprised because something is out there lurking. And I think you should be really aware of what might be out there lurking. Maturation is where you all fell. But if you look at the individual responses, it's not quite such a simple picture. 12% of you said we're in disruption. Terrific. I'd love to talk to you and hear what you're doing. 7% accelerating. When I say you said you were, it's a combination of answers that get factored into where you get plotted on the cycle. But look at this. 40%, almost 41% are also say saturation or commoditization. So you're in late stage maturation because a lot of you are tipped into saturation and commoditization. And that's something that you might want to be concerned about. Why? We're constantly battling price pressure. Of course you are. Of course you are. Sometimes it's masked because you're negotiating with your agents on commission structure. Guess what? That's just price pressure. Margins are tighter than they were a year ago. Yikes. Maybe it's an explainable away reason. Maybe it's not. We're trying to be all things to all people. Yeah, that's one of those things that you do. And as you look by size of brokerage, the bigger the brokerage in this case, the more that might be a temptation to do. Your place in the cycle, saturation. I'm going to break the first rule of speaking by actually reading this to you. I'd like you to hear it. If you're in the saturation phase is as inevitable as it is unpleasant. Companies in profitable and growing industries are going to attract competitors, and sooner or later, one too many companies enters the market. As growth begins to slow and the size of the industry pie becomes increasingly fixed, players are forced to compete more aggressively for each slice. Good for customers, not so good for product and service providers. Companies in this phase can initially mistake slowing sales for something they're doing wrong. I did. Don't do that because it will distract you. That can cause organizational leaders to lose precious time questioning their own leadership rather than recognizing that what they're experiencing is symptomatic of changing industry dynamics and calls for dispassionate analysis and smart strategic adjustments. Instead, they often begin to doubt their own ability and judgment and lacking the confidence they once had, become more opportunistic than strategic. See if this feels like you. One common example of opportunism is sacrificing margin through price or commission reductions, price promotions, or a combination of the two. It's as rational as it is justifiable given increasingly challenging competitive dynamics, but it's also a reflex, and usually an unhealthy one. Pricing pressure is a classic indicator of market saturation, and to give into it is to exacerbate the trend. As companies move through the saturation phase, they tend to feel increasingly disoriented, can begin to drift, and start to lose faith in themselves and each other, threatening even the healthiest corporate cultures. It's not uncommon to begin casting about for silver bullet solutions in an effort to get back on track, sometimes even seeking to bolster the top line through mergers and acquisitions. Fortunately, there are a number of strategies that can help companies recalibrate their product and service offerings, distribution systems, and marketing approaches to focus on the denominator of the price value equation, keeping them ahead of competitors who are dealing with the same dynamics. But ahead lies the commoditization phase, which should be avoided at all costs. Wow. Now, the good news is you're not there yet, at least as a whole. This is the overall profile and the profile by size brokerage. You haven't tipped into that dangerous area of red, but you're not terribly far from it. So it's something to keep an eye on, especially when you remember the lack of alignment issue, especially because we're experiencing some internal discord, more so among big brokerages than small. That's natural. The bigger the company, the tougher the culture, generally speaking. There's a lot of gossip at work. Same thing. This is what will destroy you. Not that realtors ever gossip. Office politics are really getting in the way. You want to see very little, if any, red on any of these things. We're more opportunistic than strategic. In this case, it favors the bigger brokers rather than the smaller ones, naturally, because bigger brokers tend to have more sophisticated systems and more people that they can put on things, more infrastructure. We tend to overthink things. Yikes, don't like to see this. Shooting from the hip doesn't work anymore. That's ugly, red. Our company is embarking on uncharted territory. No, red is not good in this case, but it kind of is, because if you're aware of it, that's the first step. If you're aware that you're embarking on uncharted territory, good for you, because we need to chart the territory. Several of you say we need a new business model. Good for you, because I think you do. Maybe not immediately. Certainly absolutely long-term. Maybe not so immediately. Midterm, what does that look like? We need to be looking at new business models in this industry. Some of you even say we're just trying to survive. Thank you for being honest, by the way. I know this is anonymous, but nevertheless, it's not easy to answer it that way. I mentioned earlier, we've recently gone through an acquisition, or we'll soon go through one. That's fine. It's not the answer. Most mergers and acquisitions are an attempt to buy growth or to save expenses. It's not the answer to solving the industry problem. And then we've recently gone through leadership succession, and we'll soon go through it. I could get off on the tangent on this. Succession is not a bad thing, but the reason that red is here because succession brings up all kinds of issues. We do succession consulting. We're going through succession ourselves as a company. The process of succession brings all these issues to the fore, and so it's something that you need to be aware of. Okay, association MLS, and then we'll wrap this up. Briefly, again, maturation phase, a little bit less difference among the different cycles. The association MLS in maturation phase, it's a different challenge. It's a different proposition. You can see how association board of directors, MLS board of directors, and committee chairs differed. They didn't really differ here, but you can see it somewhat in the breakdown of answers. Biggest business challenge here, growth and change in the marketplace. We see this true of associations all over the country, that the business model is changing. It's kind of being forced to change. It's exacerbated by economic trends like COVID or recession, but associations today are not what they were in the 1970s, the 1980s, and 1990s. The biggest business challenge kind of cuts across the different answers there: pricing, economy, change, staffing, so forth. We're constantly battling price pressure. Again, a different, kind of wipe your palate clean. It's a different answer, different reason for answering this way than brokers. Nevertheless, margins are tighter than they were a year ago. This stuff rolls downhill. Loyalty of our customers might not be growing as much as we would like it to. They may not fully understand the value we give them. This is a pattern we see in associations across the country. Our customers know what we stand for. I'm more bullish on our future than I was a year ago. I sure would like to see those numbers improve. With associations, marketplace has changed. We don't know our place in it. You can see the pattern here is that committee chairs are less bullish than board members, and that might just be because of familiarity or information. I don't have enough insight into the organization to know. What do you fear most about the future of your company? Relevancy. There's that succession thing again. Consolidation, technology, and so forth. Pretty much true across the various answers from the different segments. We need a new business model too. We all should always say we need a new business model. We should always have our eye on what that new business model is going to look like. Again, health is pretty good, both across all the factors. You notice the committee chairs don't have quite as clear of a picture as the board members, and so their health profile is not quite as good. We see these things track together. It's just something to keep an eye on. Some internal discord there again. Not a lot, but a little. A lot of gossip at work. You really can't ever get rid of this entirely. I'll just comfort you with that, but there it is. We have a lot of false starts. It's actually pretty good. We tend to overthink things. Shooting from the hip isn't working anymore. There's that red again. Our company's embarking on uncharted territory. Yes, you are. Good for you. We know it. Acquisition. We ask the same question. Merger. It's in the wind. Acquisition and mergers in the wind, and that raises issues. It raises all kinds of issues. It's the perfect time to be addressing these issues. And leadership succession, the same thing. So I just touched on a brief overview of the overall results. I would encourage you to look at the individual results when you get them. So let me wrap this up. Back to Professor Levitt. Every major industry was once a growth industry. Some that are now riding a wave of growth are very much in the shadow of decline. Others thought of as seasoned growth industries have actually stopped growing. In every case, the reason growth is threatened, slowed, or stopped is not because the market is saturated. It is a failure of management. Yes, which means success is a result of management. That's the good news, is we have agency. We can use our agency to make things better, to innovate. We can take creative destruction and instead pursue creative disruption, because victims of destruction get destroyed, but agents disrupt. So back to Sir George. He said the core of every business is dying, but he didn't stop there. Every business has a dying core because that's the old heart of the business. Sir George says the key is to make sure you have the balance right between how you manage the decline or stability of the core. Apple's not walking away from iPhones, and Kodak should not have walked away from film. That's your core business. That's your cash cow. You can't walk away from how you're doing business today. That would be foolish. But what you have to do is what you do in new areas. You always have to be innovating. You always have to be attacking yourself. You always have to be looking for that next model. What's it going to be? What are we going to look like 10 and 15 and 20 years from now? Two ways of doing it. You can bet the farm, like Apple. Twice they bet the farm over the past 50 years. Twice they've been successful. Good for them. That's pretty risky. I don't know if I'd recommend it. If you're in dire straits, you may have to do that, but that's not the only way to do it. What the big companies that have been established for a long time recognize is you just have to play the numbers. So Pepsi, in their soft drink business, plays the numbers. As brand Pepsi and brand Mountain Dew and sugary soda is in secular long-term decline, they're going to milk those brands for everything that they can. But at the same time, they're investing in coconut water and all the gross stuff over on the left side of the screen. Same thing on their snack food side. Lay's potato chips and Doritos are their cash cows. They're the ones they advertise on the Super Bowl, but they're in long-term decline because they're not really food. So what Pepsi does is they either invent or acquire pita chips and popcorn and apple crisps and that sort of a thing. So what they're doing is they're always innovating even as they're managing the core business that they work on today. Each of you, as I mentioned, is going to have a PDF of your report. Here's what I'd encourage you to do. Take it home, spend 20 minutes in it, look at the answers, consider what your answers would be today to each of the questions and where you're red and where you're green and what you might do about it. And then if you have the interest, I would really suggest that you go into a conference room with your senior leadership team and you pull it apart. Some of the answers, you may have answered incorrectly, you might have interpreted it wrong, that's fine. Some of them might have been temporary or whatever, that's fine. Pull it apart though, honestly, and look at it and say, what is it that we are ignoring? What is it that we are neglecting? And how can we innovate? Because creative disruption is the key. Victims of creative destruction gets destroyed. Agents of creative disruption disrupt. That's the disruption cycle. Thanks for having me today. God bless you all and congratulations.